Picture this. A millionaire storms into a hospital, furious about a failed business deal, only to freeze in absolute shock when he sees his ex-wife through a delivery room window, giving birth to another man's triplets. But here's where it gets crazy. That other man isn't just anyone. He's a billionaire CEO worth hundreds of millions. And the millionaire? He's the fool who threw her away for a younger woman who turned out to be a corporate spy sent to destroy him. This is the story of Grant Hartley, the man who had everything and lost it all because he couldn't see the treasure standing right in front of him. This is about Sloane, the woman who rose from the ashes of betrayal to build an empire of her own. And this is about the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear, because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living so well that your ex realizes they threw away a diamond for broken glass. What happens when karma catches up? When the mistress reveals her true colors? When a broken woman becomes unstoppable? Stay with me, because this story has three peaks of absolute despair, shocking betrayals, and a triumph so sweet you'll want to stand up and cheer. Before we dive in, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button if you're ready for some serious justice. Drop a comment telling me whose side you're on, and subscribe so you never miss these stories. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. Now let's begin. Grant Hartley had exactly three things on his mind as he stormed through Memorial Hospital that Tuesday afternoon. The Riverside deal that just fell through, the $4 million he'd essentially flushed down the toilet, and finding his mother's room before visiting hours ended. What he didn't have on his mind was running into his past, especially not the past he'd spent 2 years convincing himself he'd successfully buried. He jabbed the elevator button twice, 3 times, cursing under Kia's breath. The client had gotten cold feet at the last minute. 6 months of negotiations, gone. His phone buzzed again. Amanda from the office with another crisis. He answered without looking. What? Mr. Hartley, I have the revised contracts for the Pearson property. Should I email them, or do you want me to wait until tomorrow? Email them. I'm at the hospital. My mother's post-op checkup. The elevator doors opened to reveal a crowd. He couldn't deal with people right now. I'll take the stairs. He pushed through the stairwell door, taking the steps 2 at a time, phone still pressed to his ear while Amanda droned on about clauses and contingencies. 4th floor. He shoved through the door without looking at the signs, turned left instead of right, kept walking while half listening to Amanda's summary of terms he'd already memorized. That's when he saw the sign, labor and delivery, wrong floor. He stopped, turned to head back to the stairwell. That's when he saw her through the window. A small square of glass and a door marked with the number 7. Sloane. His Sloane. No, not his. Not anymore. Not for 2 years. But that was her. Dark hair pulled back, face contorted in pain, hospital gown, and so pregnant it made his breath stop in his chest. The phone slipped from his hand, clattered against the linoleum. The sound was distant, underwater. His entire world had narrowed to that window, that room, that woman. She was screaming, gripping the bed rails, a nurse beside her, calm and professional. And there was someone else in the frame. A man, tall, dark suit, expensive. The man leaned down, kissed Sloane's forehead. Tender, intimate. The way Grant used to kiss her. The way he should have kissed her more often. Grant's legs moved without permission, carrying him closer to the window. He couldn't look away, couldn't process what he was seeing. Sloane was pregnant, very pregnant, with someone else's baby, with someone else's life. A nurse approached him. "Sir, are you okay? You look pale." He couldn't answer, couldn't form words. Inside the room, Sloane turned her head, looked toward the door, looked directly at the window. Their eyes met for 1 second, 2, 3. He watched her face change, watched shock become recognition, become horror. "No." Her voice was muted by the glass, but he could read her lips, could see the panic in her eyes. "No, no, oh, no." The woman beside her, dark hair, fierce expression, followed Sloane's gaze. Saw Grant. Her face hardened immediately. She stood, moved toward the door, protective, angry. "Get him out." Even through the door, he could hear the Sloane now, her voice rising. Get him out of here. Now. The door opened. The man from inside emerged. He was taller than Grant, broader, mid-30s maybe. He looked like money, like power, like someone who was used to being in charge. Can I help you? His voice was neutral, but his body language was clear. Stay away. Sloan, we were... Grant's brain wasn't working right. Words came out wrong, disconnected. I'm her ex-husband. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. I know who you are. A pause waited. I'm her husband. He emphasized the word. Present tense, not past. Brennan Sinclair. The name hit Grant like a physical blow. He knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Brennan Sinclair, CEO of Tech Vanguard. Forbes 30 under 40. Net worth in the hundreds of millions. Grant had read an article about him just last month. About his company's latest acquisition. About his marriage 6 months ago. To a woman named Sloan Mitchell. Mitchell was Sloan's maiden name. It couldn't be his Sloan, except it was. It had been. And he'd scrolled past it, hadn't clicked, hadn't let himself think about it. I need you to leave. Brennan's voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was steel underneath. Your presence is distressing my wife during labor, with triplets. So I'm going to ask you once. Please leave. Triplets. The word echoed in Grant's head. She was having triplets. 3 babies. 3 Lefses. With this man, with Brennan Sinclair. Security arrived. 2 guards, 1 young, 1 older with tired eyes. Sir, you need to come with us. Family only in this wing. Grant let himself be led away. Didn't resist. Couldn't. His body was on autopilot. His mind was somewhere else. Somewhere 2 years ago in a divorce attorney's office. Signing papers, telling himself this was for the best. They wanted different things. He needed to focus on his career. She needed someone who could give her more. He'd told himself a lot of lies. The guards deposited him in the waiting area. Chairs, magazines, a television, on mute. He sat, stared at nothing, saw everything. Sloan pregnant, Sloan married, Sloan happy. Sloan was someone else, someone better. Someone who'd given her everything Grant couldn't, wouldn't, didn't. What had he done? What had he thrown away? And why did it hurt so much when he was the one who'd ended it? He'd wanted out. He'd been relieved when she'd asked for the divorce. He'd signed the papers without hesitation. He'd walked away without looking back. So why did this feel like someone had reached into his chest and ripped out everything vital? His phone was still on the floor somewhere on the maternity ward. He should get it, should call someone, should do something, anything. But he just sat there, frozen, paralyzed by the weight of his own terrible choices. Inside room 7, Sloan was still spiraling. Her blood pressure wouldn't come down. The contractions were closer together, and she couldn't stop shaking. I need you to breathe. Dr. Celeste Morrison's voice was firm but kind. In through your nose, out through your mouth. I can't. He's here. He's out there. Tears streamed down Sloan's face. Not from pain, from rage, from fear. Why today? Why my day? Emma Rodriguez, her best friend, was holding her hand, squeezing tight enough to hurt. He doesn't matter. Look at me. Emma's voice was fierce. You are about to have 3 babies with a man who flew across the Pacific Ocean the second you went into labor. Grant Hartley is nothing. A footnote. He doesn't get to take up space in your head during the most important moment of your life. But the monitors were beeping urgently, blood pressure spiking, baby A's heart rate dropping. Dr. Morrison made a decision. We need to prep for emergency C-section. Now. And just like that, everything shifted into crisis mode. 5 years earlier, Sloan Bennett had believed in fairy tales. She'd met Grant Hartley at a charity auction, wearing a blue dress she'd bought on sale, working for a nonprofit that barely paid her rent. He'd been charming, successful, confident. He'd smiled at her, and the whole room had brightened. Their first date was coffee that turned into dinner that turned into walking through the city at midnight, talking about dreams and fears and the future they wanted to build. He'd proposed on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise. She'd said yes before he'd finished asking. The wedding was small. Her family, his family, a few close friends. She'd written her own vows, promised to love him through everything, to support his dreams, to build a life together. And she had. For 5 years, she'd supported, sacrificed, adjusted her entire life to fit around his. She'd taken his absences, his cancellations, his half-hearted apologies. She'd made herself smaller so he could feel bigger. And he'd taken it all without question, without appreciation, without realizing what he had, until it was gone. The turning point came 3 years into their marriage. Sloane had finally gathered the courage to tell him she was unhappy, that she felt like a ghost in her own marriage, that she needed more, needed him, needed a partner, not a roommate who paid the bills and showed up occasionally. Grant had been tired, stressed, fresh off a failed negotiation. He'd snapped. "What do you want me to do, Sloane? This is who I am. This is what I do. If you can't handle it, maybe we made a mistake." The words hung between them for 3 months, neither one taking them back, neither one apologizing, until finally she'd asked for the divorce, and he'd said yes, immediately, too quickly, because part of him had been relieved. Part of him had wanted part out, wanted the freedom to work without guilt, without someone waiting at home, without having to pretend to be someone he wasn't. The divorce had been civil on the surface, vicious underneath. Grant's attorney tried to prove she was unstable, tried to minimize her settlement. Grant offered $50,000. More than generous for 5 years, his lawyer said. His mother, Judith Hartley, had testified against her, actually stood in court and said, "She was never supportive of my son's ambitions." She held him back. Sloane had sat in that courtroom, watching the man she'd loved for 5 years, the woman who'd been her mother-in-law, destroy her character, her worth, her dignity. The judge sided with Grant on most assets. Sloane walked away with $50,000, her car, and complete devastation. But the worst part? Finding out why Grant had been so distant those last 2 years, why he'd worked so late, why he'd been so eager to end things. Madison Pierce, his executive assistant, beautiful, ambitious, 26 years old. They'd been having an affair for 8 months before Sloane found out. She'd walked in on them in his office, not just kissing. Madison was wearing the anniversary necklace Grant had claimed to have lost, the necklace he'd given Sloane 3 years earlier, during better times. Grant's response when caught, "This is why I can't talk to you. You make everything dramatic." Sloane moved out that night, filed for divorce the next morning, moved into a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood, started working 3 jobs just to survive, lost 20 pounds she didn't have to lose, stopped answering calls from mutual friends, stopped going to places they used to go together, stopped living, really, just existed. Meanwhile, Grant and Madison went public immediately. Engagement announcement 3 months after the divorce was finalized. Photos everywhere. Vacation in Bali, new penthouse, Madison wearing a 5-carat ring. Judith posted on social media, "Finally, my son found a woman who deserves him." That had been the lowest point, sitting in her studio apartment, eating ramen for the 4th night in a row, scrolling through photos of her ex-husband and his mistress living their best life, the life that should have been hers, the family he'd promised her but saved for someone else. Emma had found her that night, literally broke down the door when Sloane wouldn't answer her phone, found her on the bathroom floor, not suicidal but not exactly alive either, just empty, hollowed out, a shell of who she used to be. "You're going to therapy," Emma had said, not asked, told. "You're going to heal. You're going to become who you were always meant to be. And someday Grant Hartley is going to realize he threw away the best thing in his life. But by then, you're going to be so far beyond him, he won't even register as a blip on your radar." Sloane had wanted to believe her, tried to believe her, but believing felt impossible when you're broken into so many pieces you don't even know where to start putting yourself back together. Therapy helped, slowly. Dr. Patricia Williams specialized in helping women rebuild after divorce. She taught Sloane that Grant's choices weren't a reflection of her worth, that his inability to see her value didn't diminish her, that being alone was better than being with someone who made you feel alone. 6 months into therapy, Sloane got a job at Tech Vanguard, executive coordinator position. Good pay, good benefits, room to grow. She was still broken, but functioning. Still sad, but surviving. Then she got assigned to the CEO's office, Brennan Sinclair. And everything changed. Their first meeting was a disaster. Sloan brought coffee into a board meeting, nervous, trying so hard to be perfect. She tripped, spilled hot coffee all over his laptop during a presentation to investors. She'd waited for the yelling, the firing, the humiliation. Instead, Brennan had laughed, actually laughed. Finally, he had said, someone real in this building of robots. After the meeting, he had asked her to dinner. She'd refused, still too broken, still too afraid. He had asked again the next week. She'd refused again. Week 3, he'd adjusted his approach. Coffee then? Just coffee, as two humans who both hate our jobs sometimes. She'd said yes to coffee. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became dinner. Dinner became late-night talks about their respective divorces, their pain, their fears. Brennan had been married before. His wife had cheated with his former business partner. He understood betrayal, understood the slow death of trust, understood what it felt like to give someone everything and have them choose someone else anyway. He didn't rush her, didn't push, just showed up consistently, proving through actions that not all men were like Grant, that some men actually meant their promises. Their first kiss happened 3 months in, after he'd met Emma and actually asked her permission. Is Sloan ready for this? Because I don't want to hurt her. I'd rather wait a year than move too fast and break what we're building. Emma had approved. You're the opposite of Grant in every way. That's exactly what she needs. Or 1 year after the divorce, Sloan Bennett was dating Brennan Sinclair. Actually dating. Not just surviving anymore, but living. Maybe even thriving. He'd promoted her to Director of Strategic Initiatives, a position she'd earned through actual work, not favoritism. She'd proven herself capable, intelligent, strategic. He'd recognized it, valued it, compensated her fairly for it. His family loved her. His parents, Richard and Elizabeth Sinclair, welcomed her with open arms. No judgment about her past, no cold shoulders or passive-aggressive comments, just genuine warmth and acceptance. You make our son happy, Elizabeth had said during their first family dinner. That's all we've ever wanted for him. Someone who sees him, really sees him, and chooses him anyway. Sloan had cried that night. Happy tears, the kind she'd forgotten existed. At 18 months together, Brennan proposed. Nothing flashy, just the two of them in his apartment after a normal Tuesday dinner. I don't need a big production, he'd said. I just need you to know that I choose you every day for the rest of my life. Will you choose me back? She'd said yes, obviously, enthusiastically. They'd planned a small wedding, just close friends and family, nothing extravagant. Sloan didn't need extravagant. She needed real. She needed present. She needed chosen. 3 weeks before the wedding, an anonymous package arrived. Inside were photos. Brennan with another woman, recent photos based on his clothes, coffee dates, dinner, walking through the city. The note attached, once a cheater, always a cheater, ask him about Vanessa. Sloan's hands had shaken holding those photos. All her old fears came flooding back. The paranoia, the doubt, the certainty that she wasn't enough, would never be enough, couldn't keep a man faithful. She'd confronted Brennan that night, showed him the photos, watched his face. He'd gone from confused to furious in seconds. Vanessa is my sister. Someone's trying to sabotage us. He'd proven it, pulled up family photos on his phone, birth certificates, social media posts from years ago. Vanessa Sinclair, his younger sister, lived in Boston. They met for dinner whenever she visited New York. They laughed about it afterward, figured it was a jealous ex, some woman Brennan had dated before Sloan. They'd increased security, changed their phone numbers, moved on. The wedding day arrived. Sloan stood in front of the mirror in her simple white dress, Emma helping with her hair. You look beautiful, Emma said. You look happy. I am happy. Finally, completely happy. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She should have ignored it, should have deleted it. But she looked. The text was from Madison Pierce. Congratulations on the rebound. Grant and I are expecting our first baby. He's finally getting the family he always wanted with a real woman. Enjoy my leftovers. Attached was a photo, Madison with a visible baby bump. Grant kissing her stomach, his hand cradled protectively over their child. The panic attack hit instantly. Sloane couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls closed in, the dress felt too tight, everything felt wrong. "I'm just the replacement," she'd gasped to Emma. "I'm just the woman who got what Madison didn't want. What Grant didn't want. With me." Emma had slapped her, actually slapped her across the face. A sharp, shocking crack that cut through the panic. "Listen to me." Emma's voice was fierce, uncompromising. "Madison is trying to ruin your day because she's miserable. She got what she wanted, Grant, and she's discovering what you already know. He's a selfish, emotionally unavailable workaholic who will destroy her the same way he destroyed you. But she's having his baby? So what? That baby won't fix him, won't make him present, won't make him capable of real love. She's trapped herself with a man who doesn't know how to choose anyone but himself." Emma grabbed Sloane's shoulders. "Brennan chose you, not because Grant left you available, because you're extraordinary, because you're strong and kind and capable of real partnership. Don't let Madison Pierce poison the best thing that's ever happened to you." Sloane had gotten married that day, had said her vows, had meant every word. But Madison's text haunted her through the ceremony, through the reception, through the honeymoon. A shadow she couldn't quite shake. 4 months into marriage, Sloane discovered she was pregnant. She'd taken 3 tests, not believing the first 2, called her doctor, confirmed it. Then came the ultrasound. "I'm seeing 3 heartbeats," the technician had said, smiling. "Congratulations, you're having triplets." Sloane had stared at the screen. 3 tiny blobs, 3 lives, 3 babies. "Are you sure?" "Positive, 3 healthy babies." Brennan had been in a meeting. She'd texted him, "Can you come home? Important." He'd arrived 20 minutes later, frantic. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm pregnant." His face had gone from worried to shocked to ecstatic in seconds. We're having a baby?" "Babies, plural, 3 of them." He'd needed to sit down, had actually stumbled to the couch. Three babies. We're having 3 babies." Then he'd laughed. Pure joy. "We're going to need a bigger house and 3 cribs. Do we need 3 of everything? 3 car seats? 3... She'd kissed him to stop the spiral. "We'll figure it out. Together." But while Sloane was building her family, Grant's life was imploding in the most spectacular way possible. The baby shower had been Madison's idea. She'd insisted on something big, something public. 50 guests at their penthouse. Grant's business associates, friends, family. She'd planned everything herself, barely consulting him. Grant should have seen the signs. Madison had been distant lately, always on her phone, always making excuses. But he'd been too focused on work, on salvaging deals, on proving his company was still viable after losing several major clients. Clients who'd mysteriously all gone to the same competitor, Marcus Thornton, owner of Thornton Real Estate Development, a ruthless businessman who'd been trying to destroy Grant's company for years. The baby shower was in full swing when Marcus arrived. Uninvited, unexpected. He'd walked straight through the crowd, straight to Madison, and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, a real kiss. Possessive, intimate. The room had gone silent. Grant had stood there, frozen, watching his pregnant fiancée kiss another man at their baby shower. Marcus had pulled back, smiled at the crowd. "Sorry to crash the party, but I couldn't let Madison celebrate my baby without me being here." Madison had laughed, actually laughed. "Grant, meet Marcus Thornton, the father of my baby, my real partner, the man I've been working with for the past 8 months to destroy your pathetic little company." The truth had come out in brutal detail. Madison had been planted as his assistant by Marcus. Her job was simple: seduce Grant, get access to his files, steal his client list, feed information to Marcus, destroy him from the inside. The pregnancy had been insurance, a way to guarantee Grant wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late. "You were always so easy to manipulate," Madison had said, her voice dripping with contempt. "So eager for a young, pretty assistant to flirt with you. So ready to betray your wife for someone who made you feel important. You handed me everything I needed on a silver platter." Grant's mother, Judith, had fainted, literally collapsed. Grant's brother, Sterling, had caught her before she hit the floor. The guests had scattered. The humiliation was too much to witness. By the time security arrived to escort Marcus and Madison out, the penthouse was empty except for Grant, Sterling, and Judith recovering on the couch. "I told you she was wrong for you," Judith had said, her voice weak. "I told you Sloan was the right one, but you wouldn't listen." Grant had laughed, bitter, broken. "You testified against Sloan in our divorce. You told the judge she wasn't supportive enough. Because I was a fool. Because I thought success meant money and status instead of character and loyalty. I destroyed the best daughter-in-law I could have had because I couldn't see past my own snobbery." Over the next month, the extent of the damage became clear. Madison had stolen client lists, proprietary information, strategic plans. She'd fed everything to Marcus. Grant lost $4 million in sabotage deals. His company was hemorrhaging clients, money, reputation. Madison filed for divorce before they'd even gotten married, claiming emotional distress and demanding half of Grant's remaining assets. The baby wasn't his, paternity test confirmed. But she'd done enough damage that recovering seemed impossible. Grant had started drinking. Heavily. Sterling had forced him into therapy. "You need help. Professional help. Before you destroy what's left of your life." In therapy, Grant finally started processing what he'd done. Not just with Madison, with Sloan, his real wife, the woman who'd actually loved him. He'd thrown her away for what? For work? For ego? For an affair with a woman who'd been using him from the start? He'd seen Sloan's pregnancy announcement on social media. Brennan had posted it, a photo of Sloan glowing and happy, holding an ultrasound image clearly showing 3 babies. "Blessed beyond measure, my beautiful wife, our 3 miracles on the way." The comments were full of congratulations, love, support, Brennan's family, Sloan's friends. Even Sterling had commented, "So happy for you both." Sterling was still in touch with Sloan, had been the whole time, had maintained their friendship despite the divorce. "You knew," Grant had confronted his brother. "You knew she was married. You knew she was pregnant, and you didn't tell me. She asked me not to, said she needed space from you, needed to build her new life without your shadow over it." Sterling hadn't apologized. "I chose her friendship over your ego. I'd make the same choice again." Grant had realized something devastating in that moment. He'd lost more than Sloan. He'd lost respect. His mother's, his brother's, his own. He was the villain in his own story. 37 weeks pregnant with triplets, Sloan's water broke during dinner with investors. One moment she was smiling, making small talk. The next moment she felt the gush, looked down, said 4 words that ended the meeting immediately. "The babies are coming now." Brennan had been in Tokyo, a crucial meeting with Japanese investors. When Sloan called, he'd stood up mid-sentence, grabbed his coat, headed for the door. "My wife's in labor. We're done here." His assistant, Wesley Price, had a car waiting, a private jet fueled, everything handled. Brennan was in the air within 40 minutes, but the flight would take 14 hours. He might miss everything. Emma met Sloan at the hospital. Labor and delivery, room 7. The contractions were intense, close together. 37 weeks was early for triplets, but not dangerously so. Dr. Morrison was calm, experienced, confident. "All 3 heartbeats are strong. You're progressing well. This might happen faster than expected." "Is Brennan going to make it?" Sloan had gasped between contractions. "He's going to try. His plane just took off. He'll be here as fast as humanly possible." Meanwhile, 4 floors above, Grant had pulled into the hospital parking garage. He was furious. The Riverside deal had fallen through. 6 months of work, wasted. He'd come to the hospital to check on his mother's post-surgery recovery, needing something normal, something routine. He'd taken the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, pushed through the wrong door, turned down the wrong hallway, and saw her through that window. Now he was in the waiting room trying to process what he'd witnessed. Sterling arrived with Judith in a wheelchair. "You knew," Grant said again. "Accusation. Pain. You both knew." "We knew she'd moved on," Judith said quietly. "We knew she was happy. We knew she deserved to be happy after what we did to her." I need to see her. I need to apologize. No, Sterling was firm. You need to leave. Let her have this moment without you ruining it. But Grant couldn't leave, couldn't walk away. Not this time. So he stayed in that waiting room, listening to the announcements, watching the nurses rush past, waiting for news about a woman who wasn't his anymore. Inside room 7, complications were developing. Baby A's heart rate had dropped. Once, then twice. Dr. Morrison made the call. We need to prep for emergency C-section. Baby's in distress. We can't wait. Emma held Sloane's hand as nurses flooded the room. Brennan's almost here. Wesley just texted. 15 minutes. I can't wait 15 minutes. They need to come out now. I know, but you're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. Sloane wanted to believe her, but fear was clawing at her chest. What if something went wrong? What if she'd been too happy, too content? What if the universe was balancing the scales? No, she wouldn't think like that. Her babies would be fine. She would be fine. Everything would be fine. Brennan burst through the stairwell door, having sprinted up 4 flights. He'd run from the car, through the lobby, refusing to wait for elevators. His suit was wrinkled. His tie was gone. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the 14-hour flight. A nurse intercepted him. Mr. Sinclair, your wife's being prepped for emergency C-section. You can scrub in. Follow me. He'd followed without hesitation, without questions, just moved. Grant watched this from the waiting room, watched Brennan sprint past, watched the urgency, felt his stomach drop. Something was wrong. Something was wrong with Sloane, with the babies. And it was his fault. His presence had stressed her, had spiked her blood pressure, had created complications that wouldn't exist if he'd just stayed away. If she died, if something happened to her, he'd have to live with that forever. In the operating room, Sloane was being prepped. Epidural placed, surgical drapes arranged. Brennan beside her in scrubs, holding her hand. I'm here. I'm right here. Not going anywhere. I'm scared. I know, but you're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived a marriage that tried to break you. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. You can survive this. Dr. Morrison appeared, also in scrubs, calm and ready. Sloane, we're going to meet your babies now. Are you ready? She'd nodded, because she was, because she had to be, because 3 lives depended on her being brave enough to face this. The scalpel cut clean and precise. Sloane couldn't feel pain, just pressure, movement, the strange sensation of her body being opened. First baby coming out, Dr. Morrison announced. Then a sound, the most beautiful sound Sloane had ever heard. A cry, strong, healthy, angry. It's a boy, baby A, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Tears streamed down Sloane's face. Brennan was crying too, kissing her forehead, her cheeks. Our son, we have a son. Second baby, also a boy, 6 pounds, 11 ounces. Another cry, another wave of relief and joy. And baby number 3, it's a girl, 6 pounds, 8 ounces. The smallest cry, but just as fierce. Connor, Ethan, Nora, their family, complete. But then the monitor started beeping. Different, urgent. Blood pressure dropping, she's hemorrhaging, I need suction now. And everything went dark around the edges. Sloane heard voices. Urgent, clinical, fast. She tried to focus, tried to stay present, but her body was giving up. The exhaustion was overwhelming. The darkness was so inviting. Sloane, stay with me. Brennan's voice cut through the fog. Look at me. The babies need you. I need you. She tried. She really tried, but everything was getting distant, like falling down a long tunnel. The babies, she managed to whisper. Are they okay? They're perfect. All 3. Now you need to be okay too. Dr. Morrison's voice changed from warm to commanding, from celebrating to saving. I need blood, type O negative, 2 units, now. Sloane thought about letting go, about how easy it would be to just drift away, to stop fighting. But then she thought about 3 tiny faces, 3 lives that needed her, 3 babies who just entered the world and deserved their mother. Not today. She wouldn't give up today. Not when she finally had everything she'd ever wanted. She fought, pulled herself back from the edge, forced herself to stay present, to stay alive. I've got it. Bleeding's under control. Dr. Morrison's voice shifted back to relieved. She's stabilizing. Blood pressure coming up. Good. That's good. Brennan hadn't let go of her hand. His grip was tight enough to hurt, but she didn't care. That pain meant she was alive, meant she'd survived. They'd wheeled her to recovery. Brennan walked beside the gurney, never leaving her side. Wesley was waiting, efficient as always. The private suite is ready. Your parents are on their way. I've updated the legal documents. Everyone from the office sends congratulations. In recovery, they'd brought the babies. One by one, then all together. Sloan held them, her arms full of tiny humans, her heart so full it hurt. Connor, calm and observant, already studying the world with serious eyes. Ethan, vocal and demanding, letting everyone know exactly what he needed. Nora, watchful and quiet, taking everything in with an intensity that promised she'd be a force to reckon with. We made them, Sloan whispered. They're real. They're ours. Best thing I've ever done, Brennan's voice cracked. You're the best thing I've ever done. Emma had entered, taken one look at the babies, burst into tears. They're perfect. You're perfect. This is perfect. And for a moment, it was perfect. Until Sloan remembered Grant was somewhere in this building. Her past had invaded her present. Her pain had showed up uninvited to her joy. But she pushed the thought away, refused to let him take up space. Not now, not today. Today was about her babies, her husband, her life. Grant Hartley was a ghost, a memory, a lesson learned. He didn't get to haunt her anymore. In the waiting room, Sterling had finally convinced Grant to leave. She's okay. The babies are okay. Everyone's healthy. You have confirmed what you needed to know. Now go home. But Grant couldn't move, couldn't leave. Because somewhere in this hospital was the life he could have had, the family he'd thrown away, the woman he'd destroyed and who'd rebuilt herself into something even more beautiful than before. I made a mistake, he'd said to Sterling, to Judith, to himself. The biggest mistake of my life. Yes, Judith had agreed. You did, and now you have to live with it. They'd gone home eventually, Grant to his empty penthouse, Sterling and Judith to their respective homes, leaving Sloan and Brennan and 3 babies to begin their life together. The next morning, Grant had sent a request through Sterling. Could he see Sloan? Just for a moment? Just to apologize? Sloan's first instinct had been no. Absolutely not. Never, but Emma had a different perspective. Maybe you need closure too. Maybe you need to face him. Tell him exactly what you think. Make him understand what he did. Brennan had been skeptical. You don't owe him anything. Not a conversation, not a moment of your time. But Sloan had decided she needed this. Needed to confront the man who'd broken her. Needed to look him in the eye and tell him she'd survived. That she'd won. 5 minutes, she'd agreed, in the hallway, and you stay with me. Always. They'd met in the hallway, neutral ground, fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, the smell of antiseptic everywhere. Grant stood with Sterling. Sloan stood with Brennan and Emma. Grant looked terrible. Exhausted, destroyed, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Good. Thank you for agreeing to see me. His voice was rough, uncertain. Sloan said nothing, just waited. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For the divorce. For Madison. For how I treated you during our marriage. For all of it. Okay. Her voice was cold, distant. The voice she'd used with a stranger at a coffee shop. I made a mistake. Letting you go. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Something in Sloan snapped. The anger she'd thought she'd processed came flooding back. You didn't make a mistake, Grant. You made thousands of choices, thousands of decisions to choose everything else over me. Her voice rose despite herself. Every time you worked late, every time you canceled plans, every time you dismissed my feelings, every time you let your mother insult me and said nothing, every time you looked through me instead of at me, those weren't mistakes, those were choices. Grant flinched but said nothing. You chose Madison. You chose the affair. You chose to gaslight me when I confronted you. You chose to let your mother testify against me in court. You chose to offer me $50,000 for 5 years of my life. Choices, Grant, not mistakes. I know, you're right. I was wrong about everything. And I've spent 2 years healing from the damage you did. Her voice shifted, softer but more devastating. Building a new life. Finding someone who actually sees me, who values me, who chose me every single day, not when it was convenient. She gestured to Brennan, who stood solid and steady beside her. I'm married to a man I love, a man who was there for me when I was broken, who helped me rebuild, who proposed because he couldn't imagine his life without me. Not because we'd been together long enough, not because it was expected. I have 3 newborn babies in that room, she continued. My family, the family I always wanted, the family you said you wanted but never actually prioritized. And I'm standing here looking at you, and I feel nothing. No anger, no pain, no regret, just gratitude. Grant's face crumpled. Gratitude? Yes, because you leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me. You set me free to become who I was meant to be, to find someone who could love me the way I deserve to be loved. So thank you, Grant, genuinely. Thank you for being exactly who you were, because it led me exactly where I needed to go. She paused, the final words. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of you, free of the anger, free of the hurt, free of everything you represent. But what's not okay, her voice strengthened, is you showing up today, on the happiest day of my life, and trying to make it about you, about your regrets, about your realizations, your feelings. She stepped closer. I loved you, Grant. I loved you so much it hurt. I gave you everything I had, and it still wasn't enough to make you choose me. So I had to choose myself instead. Brennan spoke for the first time. This conversation is over. His voice was calm but final. Security will escort you out. And if you contact my wife again, we'll pursue legal action. Security had arrived. Grant was led away. He didn't resist, just went, head down, shoulders slumped. Judith had approached before leaving. Frail, ashamed. Sloan, I owe you an apology too. I was cruel to you during your marriage. I didn't see your worth. I'm sorry. Some of the hardness in Sloan's expression softened. Thank you for saying that. It means something. After they'd gone, Sloan had stood in that hallway, Brennan's arm around her, Emma squeezing her hand. She'd done it. She'd faced her past. She'd said what she needed to say. And now it was over. Really, finally over. They'd returned to the recovery room, to the babies, to the future, to everything that mattered. 2 weeks later, Madison showed up. Sloan was home with the triplets, exhausted but happy, when the doorbell rang. Emma answered, saw Madison standing there with a baby. Absolutely not. Leave now. I need to talk to Sloan, please. Against her better judgment, Sloan had come to the door, looked at the woman who'd destroyed her first marriage, who'd sent that text on her wedding day. What do you want? Marcus left me. The baby wasn't even his. I was sleeping with both of you and a third man. I don't even know whose baby this is. Madison's voice was desperate. I'm broke. I have nothing. And Brennan has billions. I need money. $500,000. Sloan had laughed, cold, sharp. You destroyed my marriage, humiliated me, sent me a text on my wedding day specifically designed to hurt me. And now you want my money? If you don't give it to me, I'll go to the press. I'll tell them Brennan stole you from Grant while you were still married. Ruin his reputation. Sloan's expression had gone from amused to dangerous. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're never going to contact me again. Because if you go to the press, I have evidence of your affair with Marcus that started before my divorce was finalized. I have the text you sent Grant. I have proof of corporate espionage. I will bury you so deep you'll never recover. Madison had left, defeated, desperate, alone. Emma had appeared from the kitchen. I recorded all of that. You're a badass now. I learned from the best, Sloan had said, hugging her friend. 6 months passed. Connor, Ethan, and Nora grew from newborns into real babies with personalities. Connor remained serious and observant. Ethan was loud and demanding. Nora was strategic, always watching, always planning. Sloan had started her master's degree in nonprofit management. Online classes, part-time, working around 3 babies and consulting work. It was hard but fulfilling. The Sinclair Foundation was thriving. The Fresh Start Initiative had helped 73 women in its first 6 months. 73 women who'd rebuilt their lives, found jobs, gained independence. Then Judith got sick. Cancer. Stage 4. She had weeks, maybe a month. She'd requested to see Sloan. Sterling delivered the message, apologetic. You don't have to go. You don't owe her anything. But Sloan had gone anyway, with Brennan beside her, with her baby sleeping in the car seat carriers. Judith's hospital room was sterile, quiet. The machines beeped steadily. She looked frail, so different from the strong, cold woman who testified against Sloan in court. You came. Judith's voice was weak but surprised. You asked. I'm dying. Direct, no preamble. And I needed to say something before I go. I destroyed you. I was cruel. I was wrong about everything. Sloan said nothing, just waited. You were the daughter I should have protected, the daughter-in-law I should have treasured. Instead, I made you the enemy. I testified against you. I supported Madison. I was a fool. Yes, Sloan agreed. You were. Can you forgive me? Sloan looked at this dying woman, thought about holding grudges, about revenge, about letting bitterness poison her. Then she looked at her babies, at Brennan, at the life she'd built. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, because I deserve peace, Judith had cried then. Real tears. Grant comes here every day. He's still broken. He'll never recover from losing you. That's not my burden anymore. No, it's mine. I raised him to value the wrong things. Money over character, status over loyalty, success over love. He learned from me, and now we both have to live with the consequences. Judith died that night, peaceful, finally at rest. The funeral was small. Grant was there watching from a distance. As Sloan arrived with Brennan and the triplets, he didn't approach, just watched. Sterling told Sloan afterward, he's in therapy, real therapy, trying to be better, for himself, not to win you back. Good. Everyone deserves to heal. He asked me to tell you something. He said, I hope she's happy. I hope her babies grow up seeing their mother the way I should have seen her, as someone extraordinary. Sloan had nodded, felt nothing dramatic, just quiet acknowledgement. Tell him I hope he finds his peace too. And that was it, the final thread connecting her to Grant Hartley. Cut, released, gone. 1 year after the hospital, 1 year after 3 babies, 1 year after confronting her past and choosing her future. The Sinclair Foundation Gala was the event of the season. 500 guests, major donors, board members, press coverage. Sloan was co-chair, giving the keynote speech about supporting women through divorce and transition. She'd worked on the speech for weeks, revised it a dozen times, practiced in front of the mirror, in front of Brennan, in front of Emma. But standing at that podium, looking out at 500 faces, she'd set her notes aside and spoke from the heart. 2 years ago, I was completely broken. I'd just ended a marriage that had slowly killed my spirit over 5 years. I was starting over with nothing. No money, no confidence, no idea who I was without someone else defining me. The room quieted. People stopped their side conversations. Listened. I won't lie and say it was easy. It wasn't. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Rebuilding yourself from nothing. Learning to trust again. Learning to believe you're worthy of love when someone you trusted told you, through their actions, that you weren't. She paused, made eye contact with people throughout the room. But I had help, friends who refused to let me give up. Therapy, programs exactly like the ones we fund through this foundation. The Fresh Start Initiative provides resources for women leaving difficult situations. Job training, counseling, child care assistance, legal help, all the practical things you need when you're starting over. But more than that, it provides belief, someone looking at you when you're at your lowest and saying, I believe you can do this. I believe you're strong enough. I believe you deserve better. Her voice cracked slightly. That belief saved my life, and now I get to be that person for others. I get to look women in the eye and say, you can survive this. You can rebuild. You can become who you were always meant to be. So when you donate tonight, know that you're not just funding programs. You're giving people permission to start over, to build lives they actually want to live instead of lives they're just enduring. You're reminding people that endings can be beginnings, that pain can transform into purpose, that broken pieces can rebuild into something stronger than the original. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. People crying, nodding, moved. Grant had been in the audience. Sterling had invited him, thinking it might help with his healing. Grant had watched Sloan shine, confident, powerful, healed. After the speech, he'd approached. Careful, respectful. You were incredible, you always were. I was just too blind to see it. I hope you find your peace, Grant. I really do. I hope I become someone who deserves it. He'd paused. I'm dating someone, taking it slow, using everything I learned from failing you to try not to fail her. That's my punishment in my growth, knowing exactly what I lost and spending the rest of my life trying to be better. That's not punishment, that's healing. I'm glad you're trying. They'd shaken hands. Closure. Finally. Really. The triplets' first birthday party was beautiful chaos. Sloane's backyard full of family and friends. Connor, Ethan, and Nora toddling around like tiny drunk people, exploring everything, falling and getting up and falling again. Sterling was there, having become Uncle Sterling to the triplets. Emma was there with her new boyfriend. Brennan's parents, Sloane's family. The community they'd built. 3 cakes for 3 babies. Connor approached his methodically, examining the frosting before carefully deconstructing the entire thing. Ethan went face first, enthusiastic and messy. Nora was skeptical, tasted delicately, remained perfectly clean and in control. They're so different, Sloane's mother said. 3 completely different people from the same pregnancy. I love watching them become themselves, Sloane agreed. Later, after most guests had left, Sloane sat on the grass with her 3 one-year-olds. They were exhausted, covered in cake, fighting sleep the way babies do. Happy birthday, she whispered to each of them. 1 whole year. You've been in the world for 1 whole year, and you've made it so much better. Brennan joined her. They were surrounded by the debris of a day fully lived. Torn wrapping paper, empty plates, balloons drifting lazily. Are you happy? He asked. Really, truly happy? Sloane thought about it, about the journey from broken wife to this moment, about the pain and the healing and the transformation. Yes, I'm exhausted and overwhelmed, and sometimes I want to run away to a spa for a month. But yes, I'm genuinely happy. I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to be doing. No regrets? Only that I didn't leave Grant sooner, that I wasted 5 years on someone who couldn't see my worth. But even that led me here. To you. To them. She gestured to the babies. So maybe no regrets at all. Just gratitude for the journey. That night, after the babies were asleep, Sloane stood in her favorite spot, the doorway of the nursery, watching her 3 children sleep. Connor on his back, arms spread wide. Ethan curled on his side, thumb in mouth. Nora on her stomach, face turned toward the door, always watching, even in sleep. Brennan came up behind her, arms around her waist. What are you thinking? That I'm grateful for all of it, every single part. The pain, the healing, the growth, even Grant, even the divorce, even the hard parts, because they made me who I am, taught me what I needed to learn, led me exactly where I needed to go. She turned in his arms. If I hadn't married Grant, I wouldn't have learned what I didn't want, wouldn't have developed the strength to leave, wouldn't have been ready for you, wouldn't be who I am now. You were always worthy of this. But I didn't know that, didn't believe it, had to learn it the hard way through pain, through breaking, through rebuilding myself from absolutely nothing. They stood there, 2 people who'd found each other after heartbreak, who'd chosen each other every day since, who'd built something real and lasting and true. In that moment, Sloane Bennett Sinclair understood something profound. She'd survived, she'd healed, she'd thrived. She'd transformed her endings into beginnings, her pain into purpose, her broken pieces into something beautiful. She was home, finally, completely, forever home. And Grant Hartley? He was exactly what he should be. A memory, a lesson, a chapter that had ended a long time ago. She wished him well, genuinely. Hoped he found his healing, his peace, his own happy ending. But her story? Her story was just beginning. With 3 babies sleeping down the hall, with a husband who chose her every single day, with a foundation helping hundreds of women find their own strength, with a life she'd built from her own determination and courage. She'd taken what tried to destroy her and used it to become unstoppable. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not vindication, just choosing herself, choosing healing, choosing to believe she deserved more, and then building that more with her own 2 hands. That was power, that was transformation, that was justice. And as she fell asleep that night in Brennan's arms, in the home she'd chosen with 3 babies sleeping peacefully down the hall, she knew with absolute certainty this was exactly where she was meant to be. This was exactly who she was meant to be. This was exactly the life she was meant to live. Not in spite of her past, but because of it, through it, transformed by it into something stronger, something better, something whole. The end was really just the beginning. And Sloane's beginning was everything she'd ever dreamed of and more. 1 year after the hospital, 1 year after 3 babies, 1 year after confronting her past and choosing her future. The Sinclair Foundation Gala was the event of the season. 500 guests, major donors, board members, press coverage. Sloane was co-chair, giving the keynote speech about supporting women through divorce and transition. She'd worked on the speech for weeks, revised it a dozen times, practiced in front of the mirror, in front of Brennan, in front of Emma. But standing at that podium, looking out at 500 faces, she'd set her notes aside and spoke from the heart. 2 years ago, I was completely broken. I just ended a marriage that had slowly killed my spirit over 5 years. I was starting over with nothing. No money, no confidence, no idea who I was without someone else defining me. The room quieted. People stopped their side conversations, listened. I won't lie and say it was easy. It wasn't. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Rebuilding yourself from nothing, learning to trust again, learning to believe you are worthy of love when someone you trusted told you, through their actions, that you weren't. She paused, made eye contact with people throughout the room. But I had help, friends who refused to let me give up, therapy, programs exactly like the ones we fund through this foundation. The Fresh Start Initiative provides resources for women leaving difficult situations, job training, counseling, childcare assistance, legal help, all the practical things you need when you're starting over. But more than that, it provides belief. Someone looking at you when you're at your lowest and saying, I believe you can do this. I believe you're strong enough. I believe you deserve better. Her voice cracked slightly. That belief saved my life. And now I get to be that person for others. I get to look women in the eye and say, you can survive this. You can rebuild. You can become who you were always meant to be, Mo. So when you donate tonight, know that you're not just funding programs. You're giving people permission to start over, to build lives they actually want to live instead of lives they're just enduring. You're reminding people that endings can be beginnings, that pain can transform into purpose, that broken pieces can rebuild into something stronger than the original. The standing ovation was building when the ballroom doors burst open. Madison Pierce stumbled in, clearly intoxicated, baby on her hip, mascara streaked down her face. The room went silent. Every head turned. You want to talk about starting over? Madison's voice was shrill, desperate. You stole my life. You took Grant. You took everything. Security moved immediately, but Brennan held up a hand. Sloane stepped forward to the edge of the stage, calm, composed. This was her moment, not Madison's. I didn't steal anything from you, Madison. You can't steal what was never yours to begin with. Sloane's voice carried through the silent ballroom. You destroyed your own life with your choices, just like you destroyed Grant's company through corporate espionage. Madison lunged forward. You have everything. The billionaire husband, the 3 perfect babies, the foundation, the respect. I have nothing. You had chances, Sloan said quietly. You chose greed over integrity, lies over truth. You chose to hurt people for money. Those were your choices, not mine. Emma had moved to stand beside Sloan, protective, ready, but Sloan didn't need protection. Not anymore. I was broken once too, Sloan continued, her voice gentle now. Destroyed by betrayal, starting over with nothing. The difference is I chose to heal, to rebuild, to become someone I could respect. You chose bitterness and revenge. That's why you have nothing, Madison. Not because I took anything from you. The doors opened again. FBI agents, Sterling behind them, grim-faced. Madison Pierce, you're under arrest for corporate espionage, fraud, and extortion. The room erupted, cameras flashing, guests gasping, Madison screaming as she was handcuffed, her baby taken by child services. Marcus Thornton has already been arrested, one agent announced to the room. His entire operation has been shut down. Anyone who received information from Ms. Pierce or Mr. Thornton should contact the Bureau immediately. As Madison was led away, she turned back one last time. You think you've won? You think you're better than me? Sloane's response was quiet but firm. I don't think about you at all anymore, Madison. I hope you get the help you need. I really do. But your story isn't part of mine anymore. The agents left. The ballroom stayed silent for 3 long seconds. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then building. The standing ovation that had been interrupted resumed, stronger now. People weren't just applauding her speech anymore. They were applauding her grace under fire, her strength, her refusal to be dragged back into drama. Sloan finished her speech, though her hands were shaking. As I was saying, the Fresh Start Initiative gives women resources, but more importantly, it gives them permission to believe they deserve better. Thank you for supporting this vital work. After the speech, Brennan found her backstage, wrapped her in his arms. You were incredible. How did you stay so calm? Because Madison doesn't have power over me anymore. She's just a sad woman who made terrible choices. I can feel compassion for her without letting her derail my life. Grant had been in the audience. Sterling had invited him, thinking it might help with his healing. Grant had watched Sloan shine, watched her handle Madison with grace and strength, watched her refuse to be diminished. He approached carefully, respectfully. A woman beside him, young, maybe 28, professional dress, kind eyes. You were incredible, Grant said. You always were. I was just too blind to see it. Sloan noticed the woman, extended her hand. I'm Sloan. Jennifer, the woman said, smiling. I'm actually in the Fresh Start program. Grant volunteers there now. That's how we met. Sloan's eyebrows raised, looked at Grant, really looked at him. He'd lost weight, looked tired but healthier somehow. His eyes were clear, present. I've been sober 6 months, Grant said quietly. In therapy 3 times a week. Sterling got me the volunteer position at your foundation. I work with women leaving abusive situations, help them navigate the legal system, offer free consulting on financial planning. You're volunteering at my foundation? Sloan couldn't hide her surprise. Anonymously, Sterling handles everything. I didn't want you to know, didn't want to intrude on your space. But Jennifer insisted I should tell you that hiding wasn't healing. Jennifer squeezed his hand. The program saved my life, and he's been really helpful. Understanding. I think because he knows what it's like to be the villain, to have to rebuild from shame. Sloan studied them, saw something real there, something humble and broken and trying. I hope you find your peace, Grant. I really do. I hope I become someone who deserves it. But he paused. I'm dating someone who's teaching me what real partnership looks like. Taking it slow. Using everything I learned from failing you to try not to fail her. That's my punishment and my growth. Knowing exactly what I lost and spending the rest of my life trying to be better. That's not punishment. That's healing. I'm glad you're trying. Your mother, Jennifer added softly. She left something for you, in her will. Grant's been holding on to it. Grant pulled an envelope from his jacket. She wrote this before she died, asked me to give it to you when I'd become someone worthy of delivering it. Sloan took the envelope, opened it carefully. Inside was a check for $1 million made out to the Fresh Start Initiative, and a letter in Judith's careful handwriting. Dearest Sloan, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it anyway. This money is my penance. Not enough, never enough, but something. I taught my son to value the wrong things. Money over character. Status over love. I destroyed you to protect his image when I should have been protecting you both from my own poison. Use this money to help women I once would have judged. Women like you, who deserve so much more than men like my son gave them. Women who need someone to believe in them when the world has taught them they're worthless. You were the daughter I should have cherished. I hope these women find in you what I failed to give. Belief, support, love. I died knowing I was wrong about everything that mattered. Don't let anyone make you feel small ever again. You were always extraordinary. With deepest regret and profound respect, Judith Hartley. Sloane's hands trembled. Tears spilled over. Brennan read over her shoulder, his arm tightening around her waist. She changed at the end, Grant said quietly. Started seeing what she'd done, what we'd both done. This was her way of making amends. $1 million, Sloane whispered. That's life-changing for the foundation. She wanted it announced tonight at the gala. Sterling has the press release ready, but we wanted to ask you first. Sloane nodded, couldn't speak, just nodded. 20 minutes later, Sterling was at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unexpected announcement. The Judith Hartley Memorial Fund is donating $1 million to the Fresh Start Initiative. In her final wishes, Mrs. Hartley wrote that she wanted to support women rebuilding their lives after divorce. To help them find the strength and resources she wishes she'd given her own daughter-in-law. The room erupted in applause, cameras flashing, reporters scrambling. This was the story now, not Madison's arrest, Judith's redemption, Sloane's grace, the foundation's success. That night, Sloane's speech went viral. Her response to Madison was clipped, shared, quoted across social media. I don't think about you at all anymore, became a rallying cry for women everywhere setting boundaries with their past. The foundation's donations surged, 5 million in pledges by midnight, 10 million by morning. Women from across the country reaching out, wanting to help, wanting to share their stories, wanting to be part of something bigger than their pain. They'd shaken hands. Closure. Finally. Really. Grant and Jennifer left together, his arm around her shoulders. Protective but not possessive. Different. Changed. Chapter 10. Full circle. The triplets' first birthday party was beautiful chaos. Sloane's backyard full of family and friends. Connor, Ethan, and Nora toddling around like tiny drunk people, exploring everything, falling and getting up and falling again. Sterling was there, having become Uncle Sterling to the triplets. Emma was there with her new boyfriend, Daniel, who worked in tech and treated her like she hung the moon. Brennan's parents. Sloane's family. The community they'd built. The Fresh Start Initiative had expanded. 3 new locations. 73 women helped in the first 6 months. With Judith's donation and the gala pledges, they'd be able to help thousands. 3 cakes for 3 babies. Connor approached his methodically, examining the frosting before carefully deconstructing the entire thing. Ethan went face first, enthusiastic and messy. Nora was skeptical, tasted delicately, remained perfectly clean and in control. They're so different, Sloane's mother said. 3 completely different people from the same pregnancy. I love watching them become themselves, Sloane agreed. A delivery arrived mid-party. Flowers. Not from anyone at the party. The card read, "Congratulations on your beautiful family. You were right. Healing isn't punishment. It's freedom. Thank you for showing me what that looks like." Gee, Sloane showed Brennan. He read it, nodded. He's trying. Yeah, I think he really is. A reporter from the local news had requested an interview about the foundation's expansion. Sloane had agreed, figuring it would help with visibility and donations. The crew arrived as the party was winding down. Mrs. Sinclair, your story has resonated with millions of women. What would you say to someone who's where you were 2 years ago? Broken, divorced, starting over with nothing. Sloane looked at her three babies, at Brennan, at Emma laughing with Daniel, at Sterling teaching Connor how to stack blocks, at the life she'd built from absolute devastation. I'd tell her that her ex-husband's opinion of her worth isn't the truth, that she's stronger than she knows, that ending a marriage that's killing her spirit isn't failure, it's survival, that there's life after heartbreak, real life, better life. And to the women who betrayed her, the mistresses, the mother-in-laws who testified against her, I'd tell her that other people's cruelty says everything about them and nothing about her. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or reconciling. It means choosing peace over bitterness, choosing to build something beautiful instead of staying trapped in anger. What about the men who failed them, the ex-husbands? Sloane thought carefully. I hope they heal too. I hope they learn. I hope they become better. But their healing isn't our responsibility. Our responsibility is to ourselves, to rebuild, to thrive, to show our daughters and sons what real strength looks like. The interview aired that night. By morning, it had 3 million views. By the end of the week, 20 million. Sloane's face was everywhere. Her story was everywhere. The Fresh Start Initiative's website crashed from traffic. Donations poured in, women sharing their own stories, men apologizing for their failures, therapists citing her quotes in sessions. A publisher reached out, wanted her to write a book. From Broken to Unstoppable, one woman's journey from devastating divorce to building an empire of hope. Sloane laughed when she saw the proposed title. Showed Brennan, an empire of hope. Is that what we've built? You've built more than that. You've built proof that endings can be beginnings, that pain can transform into purpose, that broken pieces can rebuild into something stronger than the original. Later, after most guests had left, Sloane sat on the grass with her 3 one-year-olds. They were exhausted, covered in cake, fighting sleep the way babies do. Happy birthday, she whispered to each of them. 1 whole year. You've been in the world for 1 whole year, and you've made it so much better. Brennan joined her. They were surrounded by the debris of a day fully lived. Torn wrapping paper, empty plates, balloons drifting lazily. Are you happy? He asked. Really, truly happy? Sloane thought about it. About the journey from broken wife to this moment. About the pain and the healing and the transformation. Yes, I'm exhausted and overwhelmed, and sometimes I want to run away to a spa for a month. But yes, I'm genuinely happy. I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to be doing. No regrets? Only that I didn't leave Grant sooner, that I wasted 5 years on someone who couldn't see my worth. But even that led me here, to you, to them. She gestured to the babies. So maybe no regrets at all, just gratitude for the journey. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her look. It was from Madison's attorney. Ms. Pierce asked me to convey that she's accepted a plea deal. 5 years in prison. She wanted you to know she's getting help. Mental health treatment, addiction counseling. She said to tell you, you were right, I chose bitterness. I'm trying to choose differently now. Sloane showed Brennan. He read it, squeezed her hand. Everyone's healing, even the villains. Even the villains, she agreed. That night, after the babies were asleep, Sloane stood in her favorite spot, the doorway of the nursery, watching her 3 children sleep. Connor on his back, arms spread wide. Ethan curled on his side, thumb in mouth. Nora on her stomach, face turned toward the door, always watching, even in sleep. Brennan came up behind her, arms around her waist. What are you thinking? That I'm grateful for all of it, every single part, the pain, the healing, the growth, even Grant, even the divorce, even the hard parts. Because they made me who I am, taught me what I needed to learn, led me exactly where I needed to go. She turned in his arms. If I hadn't married Grant, I wouldn't have learned what I didn't want, wouldn't have developed the strength to leave, wouldn't have been ready for you, wouldn't be who I am now. You were always worthy of this. But I didn't know that, didn't believe it, had to learn it the hard way through pain, through breaking, through rebuilding myself from absolutely nothing. They stood there, 2 people who'd found each other after heartbreak, who'd chosen each other every day since, who'd built something real and lasting and true. In that moment, Sloan Bennett Sinclair understood something profound. She'd survived. She'd healed. She'd thrived. She'd transformed her endings into beginnings, her pain into purpose, her broken pieces into something beautiful. She was home, finally, completely, forever home. And Grant Hartley? He was exactly what he should be. A memory, a lesson, a chapter that had ended a long time ago. She wished him well, genuinely, hoped he found his healing, his peace, his own happy ending. From his work at the foundation, from Jennifer's gentle presence in his life, it seemed he might. Madison was getting help. Facing consequences, yes, but also getting treatment. Choosing healing over bitterness, even from behind bars. Marcus was awaiting trial, his empire destroyed, his reputation ruined. Karma had found him thoroughly. And Sloan, her story was just beginning. With 3 babies sleeping down the hall, with a husband who chose her every single day, with a foundation helping thousands of women find their own strength, with a book deal that would spread her message even further, with a life she'd built from her own determination and courage. She'd taken what tried to destroy her and used it to become unstoppable. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not vindication, just choosing herself, choosing healing, choosing to believe she deserved more, and then building that more with her own 2 hands. That was power. That was transformation. That was justice. And as she fell asleep that night in Brennan's arms, in the home she'd chosen, with 3 babies sleeping peacefully down the hall, she knew with absolute certainty this was exactly where she was meant to be. This was exactly who she was meant to be. This was exactly the life she was meant to live, not in spite of her past, but because of it, through it, transformed by it into something stronger, something better, something whole. The end was really just the beginning, and Sloane's beginning was everything she'd ever dreamed of and more.